Welcome back. Welcome back to More Up North. Michael Carey, Arliss Sturgulewski, and Jack Roderick, who I'm quickly falling in love with, I think. This is just such
I knew it would happen, Jack.
That's the off-camera part.
No, it's just, you know, there's something I think that Alaska has that other people don't. And one is that you have access to your leadership. And over 40 years' time, everybody has a Ted Stevens story or a Don Young story. Mm-hmm. Or, you know, that's very common. But, you know, it seemed like for a long time that in Alaska, if you drove past someone and their car was in the ditch, you didn't care what their bumper stickers said. You stopped and helped them out, and then maybe you thought about it then, but you weren't. It didn't keep you from stopping and helping. Do you think people were just a little bit? Are people getting spoiled now? Do you think that's why the partisanship is there the way it is?
The partisanship is there, but Alaska is still Alaska to me. You go everywhere, you know so many people, and that's what I love about this place. I mean, people in the grocery store that come from rural Alaska. You go to Fairbanks, you go to Juneau. We still know each other because there's still a lot of people doing a lot of good stuff. There are those that want to play the party games, and although I've been a registered Republican because my dad was, I am not that way. And most Alaskans, in my opinion, are not.
Yeah, and in your party, I can't believe you stayed registered Republican.
Well, there's a certain defiance in that.
You're like, but they can't run you off.
They can't run me off.
You know, Arliss had won the primary running against Wally Hickel, and she won. You won it fair and square, and he didn't.
But I got more Democratic votes. I think I split with Tony Knowles, so there we were.
And so Wally ran against you as an independent and won. Yeah. And that was your party. That's so funny. You're just doing it out of spite at this point.
Oh no, it's not spite. There's a lot of tenets I believe in, and you know, you have to be an independent too. I can be an independent Republican.
Sure.
Yeah.
Jack, what do you think about how people seemed a little kind? I mean, you said you had that you hadn't voted for Ted before, but you were friends and you were business law partners, and that just wasn't part of the. It didn't have to be that way.
Well, we practiced when Ann was alive, and Ann and my wife Martha were very close, and that kept us sort of on track socially. I've got a great picture of the four of us. I have to get it into the archive somehow. Michael, you can help me on that.
Yes, sir.
Oh, several pictures. Well, let's see, I'm off subject. Everybody talks about this entitlement mentality. I don't understand it. Has Alaska changed because we have the permanent fund dividend? You know, are we all sitting around expecting something to be given us? We didn't have that in the early days because there wasn't anything here except the railroad. There wasn't any business, you know, ma and pa shops. So I'm a little confused. I don't know if Alaska has changed. I like to think Anchorage has just gotten bigger. Mm-hmm. And Arliss is right. I mean, we run into people we know all the time. But is this entitlement thing a big deal?
Right, because so much was brought back by our delegation, by Ted Stevens.
And Big Oil.
And Big Oil here, and, you know, Alaska would be a very different place. Michael, what's your take on that?
Well, I was going to tell a little story here, a couple of little stories. At one point, I was interested in this Diane Wells murder story, and Ted had been the prosecutor, and I wanted to interview him for it, and so I called him up, and he agreed to an interview, and he said, let's meet at the hotel restaurant where I'm staying. I think there was some big conference there. So I went thinking, I know this is going to work. I'm going to have a really hard time talking to him because there'll be too many people around. And that's exactly how it worked. I started interviewing him. He had a nice young man with him. Sometimes you have a nice young woman with him who was taking notes. And a line began to form of supplicants. Alaskans who had a real good idea to help this state, that was going to benefit this state. They weren't in it for themselves. They wanted him to know that. And all they needed was $1, $2, $3 million, and they'd be able to do this good deed for Alaska through this program that they had, and would Ted be able to help? And what amazed me in retrospect, and I never said this, publicly before, this was a man who, with the words yes or no, had the ability to divert millions of dollars to people in programs. There's been nothing like it in my experience. I was glad that I was there. And I later wrote, it was like being in the presence of a frontier fertility god who had this remarkable power over the public purse and over public policy. And I assume there are words I can't use on here. I was going to be dramatic, right, in telling the second part of this story? You cut them out?
You can tell it.
Okay, well, in that case, they're not that bad. But Stevens, I wondered from time to time, did he get tired of this? He seemed to thrive on it because it was serving his constituents. But there were times that people would ask him for stuff that he just couldn't do. He couldn't go over to the White House and tell Bill Clinton what to do. And there were regulatory agencies where he just didn't have the influence over them for a variety of reasons, right? But that never stopped people from asking. They were used to getting results from Ted, so they continue to ask. And I wasn't present for this, but somebody I know told me that a businessman in Alaska, wanted something, big out of either the White House or one of these regulatory agencies. And finally, Ted just blew up and said, "God damn it, Bob, you got to understand. I'm a senator, not a f***ing magician."
And yet,
Subtle, like a chainsaw.
those kinds of stories, the stories of the Incredible Hulk, yada, 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 they didn't diminish the Ted Stevens we knew. I mean, a lot of them, I think, probably took place in his room, and there's only some privileged people that happened to find out, like you did, about
Well,
this
I just
story.
didn't interrupt. This will be my last comment. Let you guys talk for a while. Stevens said after on Bill Clinton's impeachment, he voted against it, which some people thought was remarkable. And he said at the time, "I know what it is to be human."
Yeah.
And that was a great thing for him to say.
It was wow.
Yeah.
You got something on that, Jack?
Not really. But I do know, my memory's terrible, but we drove up, we were practicing at the time, we drove up to Glen Allen. There was a boys something or other government.
Oh, Boy State?
Boy
Boy
State
State,
or
yeah.
something.
Mike
Yeah.
Gravel was there, Elmer Rasmussen was there, and Ted. And so Mike got up, Gravel, I think I'm not misquoting him, and said to these young politicians, "Now when you have power, you wield it. That's why you got elected. You have power, you use it." And Ted got up and said, "Well, listen, guys, sometimes you're in the majority and sometimes you're in the minority. And don't forget that." I still remember that. That's before he got elected. I mean, he got elected to the state Senate or this House. That's about all.
And that's where you saw him work across the aisles
sure, sure.
with Byrd,
Sure.
with Inouye, all kinds of
Yep.
different people.
Yep.
I admired that because I see this partisanship now, and I don't think it's going to get us very far.
No.
Not to work together and find answers to problems. And
Well,
Ted had a way. I mean, it wasn't he didn't let you know where he was.
No, not at all. I was talking to someone this week that said that the last time they had seen Ted was at Wally's wake. Mm-hmm. And he'd known him for 40 years, and he ran up to him and didn't say, "Hi, how are you doing?" or anything. He says, "Where's Roderick? You're tall. Can you see him?" And he's, you know, and he looked around. He said, "Yeah, he's over there." And then he was looking for him and had found him. So, you know,
Actually, he was trying to avoid me.
Oh, come on.
Well, I don't do this, friends. I don't do it with Michael Carey. He should have written a book. Ted should have. His own book. He started one,
right.
and he lost part of it, and I forget how. And so
The earthquake.
Was it?
Oh, is
Yeah,
that
and
right?
he talked about the notes he lost in the
Yeah.
earthquake and his personal papers.
So I was bugging him a little bit, which I never do. And he was saying, "Yeah, okay. But he never did it.
Yeah.
So I mean, can you really even write the book about him? I mean, you could, obviously you have so much history that you've got on him, and there are still people that you can interview. But do you think that the real, you know, the guy that you just like wanted to wring his neck for decisions he was making or for votes he was casting, depending on if you agreed with him or not, and at the same time you're like, that's just who he is. He was way bigger than his politics, and I think that's why. And I want to ask you this when we come back from the break is, you know, do you think part of the reason that he survived all the trial and all of that was because he was bigger than his politics? And just what that meant to Alaskans, because it seemed that I think if he'd have run for governor this year, he would have been way, way, way out in the lead. Although we know Jack wouldn't have voted for him. We'll be right back after this break.